Imagine a world where the maps are complete, every mountain is named, and every forest has been scanned by satellites from above. We live in an age of total surveillance, where the shadows of the Earth are shrinking under the bright light of our digital gaze. Yet, despite our mastery of the surface, a nagging question remains. Could something massive still be hiding just out of our sight? Deep within the crushing pressure of the Twilight Zone, the ocean remains 95% unexplored, a vast liquid desert of secrets and ghosts. For centuries, sailors returned from the abyss with tales of sea serpents and krakens, monsters so large they could swallow ships and sanity alike. Today, we dismiss these as the hallucinations of exhausted men. Yet the ocean continues to whisper back with sounds we cannot quite explain. In 1997, a series of underwater microphones picked up a sound so powerful it traveled over 5,000 kilometers across the Pacific Ocean. It was a low-frequency, ultra-powerful bloom of sound that scientists eventually named the bloop, sparking decades of intense speculation and primitive fear. If the bloop had been a biological entity, it would have needed to be several times larger than a blue whale to vibrate the water. This mystery represents the tension between what we know and what we feel, the terrifying possibility that we are not the masters of Earth. Our fascination with hidden giants isn't just about biology. It is a psychological echo of a time when we were the prey. Throughout human history, the boundary between the known world and the wild was guarded by creatures that defied our understanding of the natural order. From the dense jungles of the Amazon to the freezing peaks of the Himalayas, every culture has a story of a giant that walked away. These are the cryptids, creatures whose existence is suggested by anecdotes and blurry photos but remains unproven by the cold rigors of science. Whether it is the Yeti in the snow or the Mapinguari in the rain, these legends act as placeholders for the gaps in our knowledge. We want them to be real because a world without monsters is a world that has been entirely solved, leaving no room for wonder. But how does a creature actually stay hidden in a world of 8 billion people and a billion smartphones connected to the internet? To find out, we must look at the intersection of folklore and fossil records where the ghosts of the past meet modern biology. We must ask if these legends are merely misidentifications, or if they are the lingering memories of megafauna that once shared our landscape. Join us as we dive into the deep dark, looking for the giants that might still be breathing in the corners of the map. To understand why we still hunt for monsters, we have to look back at the giants that actually lived. Megafauna, massive animals like the mammoth, the ground sloth, and the megalodon once ruled every corner of our blue and green marble. These weren't myths, they were biological realities that shaped the ecosystems we now inhabit, leaving behind bones and deep footprints. Roughly 10,000 years ago, most of these giants vanished in a geological heartbeat, likely due to climate change and human hunting. But for our ancestors, the disappearance of a species wasn't a headline in a journal, it was a terrifying, unexplained absence. Could the memory of these real giants have survived for hundreds of generations, transforming into the legends of monsters we tell today? This is the relict hominoid or relict megafauna hypothesis, the idea that some ancient species didn't go extinct but survived in isolation. Turtle. Take Gigantopithecus blacki, a massive ape that stood 3 meters tall and lived in the forests of Southeast Asia for millions of years. It officially went extinct 300,000 years ago, yet its description bears a striking resemblance to the Yeti of Tibetan folklore. In the 1950s, the hunt for the Yeti moved from local myth to global obsession, with explorers finding mysterious tracks in the snow. Photographs of these footprints, like those taken by Eric Shipton, showed shapes that looked disturbingly human but were far too large. For a moment, the world held its breath, wondering if a lost branch of the primate family tree was staring back at us. This same pattern repeats with the Mapinguari of the Amazon, described as a one-eyed giant with a mouth on its belly. Paleontologists noticed that this monster sounds remarkably like a megatherium, a giant ground sloth that was supposed to be dead for millennia. Indigenous descriptions of the creature's thick fur, curved claws, and terrible smell align almost perfectly with the biology of these extinct beasts. If these creatures are just memories, why do people claim to see them today, in the flesh and breathing in the dark? Skeptics argue that the human brain is a pattern recognition machine that is prone to making mistakes when it is scared or tired. In a dark forest, A bear standing on its hind legs or a strangely shaped tree trunk becomes a monster in an instant. Science, however, doesn't rely on seeing. It relies on physical evidence that can be measured, sequenced, and verified in a lab. So, scientists decided to apply the ultimate test to the legends. They began hunting for the monster's very own DNA. In 2014, a team led by geneticist Brian Sykes from the University of Oxford conducted the first large-scale DNA study of cryptid samples. They collected hair and skin fragments from around the world that were claimed to belong to the Yeti and Bigfoot. Using mitochondrial DNA sequencing, they compared these mystery samples against the known genetic database of every living creature on Earth. The results were both a triumph for science and a crushing blow to those who believed the monsters were truly unique. Most samples belonged to common animals: cows, horses, raccoons, and even humans who had accidentally left their own hair behind. However, 2 samples from the Himalayas revealed a shocking secret that sent a ripple of excitement through the scientific community. The DNA didn't match a primate, but instead showed a 100% match to an ancient polar bear that lived 40,000 years ago. This suggested that a hybrid species of bear unknown to modern biology might still be roaming the high mountain passes of Tibet. It was a perfect example of how a monster could be a real, living animal that had simply been misidentified by terrified observers. But while DNA can identify a hare, it cannot prove that a breeding population of giant creatures exists in the wild. For a species to survive for thousands of years, it needs more than just a hiding spot. It needs a minimum viable population. Biologically, you cannot have just one Bigfoot, you need hundreds, if not thousands, to avoid the genetic dead end of inbreeding. A population of hundreds of large primates would require a massive amount of food and leave behind a mountain of biological waste. They would need to cross roads, be hit by cars, or leave enough environmental DNA in the rivers for us to detect. Yet, despite our infrared cameras and environmental sensors, we find nothing but silence and the occasional stray hair of a goat. This brings us to the island of knowledge paradox. As the circle of what we know grows, so does the perimeter of mystery. We search for these creatures not because the evidence is strong, but because we are uncomfortable with the idea of a fully conquered world. If we can prove that a 3-meter-tall ape still lives, then the world is still big, dangerous, and full of beautiful secrets. But if the forests are truly empty of giants, then we are truly alone, and the responsibility for the planet rests entirely on us. Is it possible that the monsters we chase are not physical beings, but reflections of our own deep-seated need for the unknown? Perhaps the real mystery isn't whether these creatures exist in the woods, but why they exist so vividly in our minds. Anthropology suggests that monsters are essential tools for a social species, acting as boundary markers for our collective behavior. They represent the chaotic power of nature that we cannot control, reminding us of our own fragility in a vast universe. When we talk about the Yeti or Bigfoot, we are often talking about a version of ourselves that never left the wild. They are our wild twins, symbols of a primal freedom that we traded for the safety and structure of modern civilization. Losing these legends would mean losing a piece of our history, a connection to the megafauna that once walked beside us. In the Amazon, the legend of the Mapinguari may be the only surviving record of the giant ground sloth's actual behavior. These stories are living fossils of information passed down through oral traditions that have outlasted the species they describe. They remind us that our planet was once much louder, much heavier, and much more mysterious than it is today. Even if science eventually proves every forest is empty, the search itself has inherent value for our curious species. It drives us to develop better DNA sequencing, more sensitive environmental sensors, and a deeper understanding of our ecosystems. It pushes us to explore the 95% of the ocean that remains dark, looking for the giants we haven't named yet. Because for every myth that is debunked, like the bloop, a new and stranger scientific reality usually takes its place. We now know the bloop was likely the sound of massive ice quakes, giant icebergs cracking and scraping against the Antarctic seabed. This is no less spectacular than a monster. It is the sound of our planet physically changing in response to a warming world. The real monsters of the 21st century may be the invisible forces we have unleashed: climate change and mass extinction. As the ice melts and the forests shrink, we are finally seeing the world for what it truly is: a delicate, finite home. We may never find a living Gigantopithecus or a megalodon, But that doesn't mean the magic of the unknown has vanished. It simply means we need to look closer at the wonders that are already here before they too become nothing but legends. In a world that feels entirely mapped, perhaps the greatest discovery left is the realization of how much we still have to lose.